afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Fallon Forum. You don't have to refresh your browser or adjust your monitor. I am not Ed Fallon. Ed has taken his hat and his bike and is traveling across the globe. I believe he's in Ireland right now, but he's asked a few of us to guest host and sit in while he's overseas. My name is Matt Sinovic. I'm the Executive Director of Progress Iowa, and it's been my pleasure this week to sit in for Ed yesterday, today, and I'll be back again tomorrow. Today we'll be talking about voter ID, potential voter identification requirements for Iowans that would require Iowans to vote, to present an ID when they go to vote. But first, I want to thank our show sponsors, the Iowa chapter of the Sierra Club, Iowa Physicians for Social Responsibility, and the Great March for Climate Action. We'll be joined today by Joe Glazebrook, an attorney representing the ACLU and LULAC, Senator Tom Courtney of Burlington, Joe Henry, the state director of LULAC, and Bonnie Pitts, the president of the League of Women Voters of Iowa. But first, let me turn my attention to Secretary of State Matt Schultz. Secretary of State does not want certain Iowans to vote. Let me repeat that to let it sink in. Our Secretary of State, the Iowa official responsible for ensuring fair elections, does not want certain Iowans to vote. Since his election in 2010, Matt Schultz has promoted a voter ID law, which would require every Iowan who wants to vote to show government-issued identification. Now, there are 30 states across the country that have enacted such a law, although Iowa is not yet one of them. Now, this may sound straightforward to you. You have to present an ID to drive, to buy alcohol, to buy cigarettes, to buy a lottery ticket. Why not have an ID when you're required to vote? And if you ask Matt Schultz, he would tell you the same thing. He would also go on to tell you that requiring an ID at the voting booth is the best way to ensure that there is no voter fraud. At least that's what he would say in public. But earlier this year, he was caught on video at a Republican political event in private, laying out his real reason for pushing voter ID. Maddie, would you cue up the video?
You know, obviously there are a whole lot of issues that we care about. You know, abortion, gay marriage, a whole lot of social issues that we care deeply about. But you have to start caring about voter ID and election integrity as well. Because if you don't have that, you'll never be able to make a difference in any other issue you care about. Never. Because they will cheat. They'll cheat. And we need to make sure that we stop them. So, what do I need you to do? I need you to start telling your friends and neighbors that you love voter ID. You love voter ID.
That's our Secretary of State, the person charged with ensuring that we have fair elections, and under most circumstances, this position would try to encourage Iowans to turn out to the polls. That's him caught on tape at a private political event, stating that if you believe in marriage equality or any of the other social positions that Matt Schultz disagrees with, he thinks you will cheat, and he doesn't want you to vote. Now, the only problem with his position, even if you believe that voter ID has a chance to prevent voter fraud, is that voter fraud simply doesn't exist. There's almost no evidence that it has taken place on any large scale. In a report from the Des Moines Register, the prosecuting attorneys in Marshall County, Warren County, Pottawatomie County, and Wright County have all said that cases of voter fraud are negligible, maybe one or two over the past 10 years. Protecting the integrity of the process, as Secretary of Matt Schultz would tell you, is a cover for preventing certain people from voting. Research shows that many Iowans do not have an ID, and they would face barriers to voting as a result. In fact, 21 million Americans don't have a government-issued ID. Most of those folks are elderly, low income, or racial and ethnic minorities. Now, it doesn't take long or take a rocket scientist to figure out why a Republican elected official wouldn't want the elderly, racial minorities, or those who don't make very much money, why they would want to prevent them from voting. Now, in addition to Schultz's voter ID push, in July of last year, just months before the November election, he tried to change the rules of the game. Schultz announced to the world that 3,582 people were registered to vote in Iowa that shouldn't be. He claimed that they were non-citizens, and he needed emergency rules just months before the election to remove anyone from voter lists whose citizenship was in doubt. The only problem? It wasn't true. It just simply was not true. The federal database he used was outdated, and he didn't even have access to the database to begin with. Now, thankfully, the Polk County District Court issued a temporary injunction preventing Schultz from sending so-called scare letters to these individuals. Now, that case is still pending, and there's been some recent action in the lawsuit since the Secretary of State actually did gain access to that federal database containing information about citizenship just a few months ago. Now, joining us in studio is Joe Glazebrook, an attorney who has represented the ACLU and LULAC in this ongoing case against Secretary of Matt Schultz. Joe, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Now, Joe, tell us a little bit about the case and sort of what happened last year,
Sure.
the emergency rules that Secretary of Schultz tried to put into place, and then what happened, and what action you and your clients took to stop it.
Certainly. Well, as you laid out, Secretary Schultz did, he tried to pass legislation in the Iowa House and in the Iowa Senate for voter ID and some other things. He was unsuccessful in the political branches of government. So rather than accept that the political branches were unwilling to move his agenda forward, he decided to unilaterally enact administrative rules in his agency, the Secretary of State's office, which essentially changed the law. Now, executive agencies are able to create regulations which are designed to interpret what the legislature passes. And so basically what Secretary Schultz did was he interpreted the pre-existing long-standing law of Iowa differently than his predecessors had done, and he did so in two ways. First, he created a rule which allowed individuals, they don't have to be citizens, they don't have to be Iowans, they don't have to have any connection to the precinct whatsoever, to challenge a voter attempting to vote in that precinct without swearing or affirming that that information is true.
So anyone across the country, no matter where they live, could challenge an Iowan's right to vote? Am I understanding
correct.
that right?
The rule did not specify any qualifications for the individual challenging the voter. It was it made it a lot easier to challenge voters. Under current Iowa law, and as we believe it should still be interpreted, you have to have a connection to that particular precinct, and you have to swear under oath that the information challenging the voter is true. And the Secretary's rule did not contain those safeguards. And so that was the first rule that we challenged. And then the second rule that we challenged was a rule in which the Secretary seeks to remove Iowa voters from the voter registration rolls by comparing data in a federal database that contains information on non-citizens who might be eligible for federal benefits with Iowa voting records. And if there's a match, then presumably he would send a letter to the voter suggesting that they're not a citizen and that they shouldn't be allowed to vote. And if they try, they'll be charged with a felony, as you mentioned, the scare letters.
Now, his argument, of course, would be that if someone's not a citizen, they shouldn't have the right to vote. So what's at issue here with that database and those letters? Like, why did that become an issue for your clients?
The federal government maintains this. It's called the SAVE database, and it stands for the Systematic Alien Verification for Entitlements database. That database was designed by the federal government to allow non-citizen residents of this country to participate in certain programs and receive certain benefits because the federal law allowed for that. It was not designed to be an up-to-date, complete, and accurate database of eligibility to vote. Because as we know, there's a process in this country whereby a non-citizen can become a citizen and thereby get the right to vote. And so there's a huge problem using this database for that purpose. The federal government, in fact, in the instructions for using this database clearly says that this database is not to be used to determine citizenship status for a suspected non-citizen. But nonetheless, Secretary Schultz is doing so.
That's the database he sought access to and chose to use.
Well, and to be technical, in the rule it says it refers to unspecified federal and state databases. So it's a very vague description, and that creates a lot of concern as well. But this is the database that he's clearly been working on.
So in the rule, it doesn't even say which database where he would potentially be getting this information.
True.
Is that right?
That is correct.
Now, when you say that the SAVE database is not up to date, how far out of date is that information?
Well, the SAVE database is generated through a variety of data collection methods. And one good example of this would be in the context of driving and when you sign up for a driver's license. The state of Iowa, for example, requires a driver to sign up for a driver's license if they want to drive. And they don't have to renew their driver's license, I think, for 6 years. And so if a non-citizen were to obtain a driver's license and then 2 years later become a citizen, there would still be information in the state of Iowa's database that indicated that person was not a citizen, even though they are a citizen. And that information, the citizenship information, is maintained by the Department of Homeland Security, I believe now. So the SAVE database doesn't keep track of whether that person becomes a citizen. It just says at one point in the past they were entitled to this particular program.
So if I'm one of those citizens who has just gained citizenship, and Matt Schultz is allowed to enact these rules that he's created, what would then happen to me? I'd receive one of these letters?
Yeah, I mean, he, as you know, he claimed that there were several thousand people that fell into this category of people who were not citizens who were voting. That was his claim. As you said, it wasn't. There's absolutely no way. He hasn't shown that to be true in any way. But yes, you would get a letter that says, first of all, we are removing you from the voting rolls unless you file or respond to this letter. And I think initially he gave a shorter window, and then he extended that in the revised version of the rule. But the point is, the burden is on you, the voter, to prove that you're a citizen. You have to produce documentation. And if you can do that, then you'll be kept on the rolls. And, you know, there's some questions about to what extent you have to do that. But realistically speaking, in the letter it says, and we have a copy of the letter, and I didn't bring it, but it says something like, please be advised that voting when you're not a citizen is a felony, which is true. But, you know, the language that's used was clearly designed to scare people, maybe some people who were a little bit unclear about whether they could vote yet or, you know, the issues involved. And so the fear that those letters would cause might encourage people who are completely eligible to vote to not do so out of fear that they'll be prosecuted.
Well, thankfully, last fall, the district court or the court ruled that or issued a temporary injunction so that these rules were not put into place for last fall's election. Right. But now, I believe Secretary of State Schultz has gained access to this database, and there has been recent action in the case. Where does it stand now, and what's next in the process?
Sure. So back in September of last year, almost exactly a year ago, the Iowa Polk County District Court issued an injunction saying that the rules in question were adopted using the emergency procedure, but there was no real emergency. The emergency procedure is designed to allow agencies to adopt rules to respond to natural disasters or military invasions. And Secretary of State Schultz's justification was that because there is a concern about voter fraud and there's an election coming up, there's an emergency. And the judge completely rejected that, as was the right thing to do. And so the injunction was put in place. But at the same time, while those emergency rules were adopted, the Secretary of State adopted the same rules using the normal rulemaking process. So it took a little bit longer, but he adopted the same rules through the normal process, which means that we couldn't make that emergency argument anymore, which was the primary basis of our first injunction. So we amended our petition to challenge the normal rules on the basis that, and this was a claim that we had made all along, we just didn't litigate it at first, that the secretary lacked the statutory authority, that the legislature didn't give him this power to take people off the voting rolls like this. And so that's the general description of what we're challenging now. We filed that amended petition back in March or so, and when the secretary gained access to the SAVE database, I think in August, is when we filed another request for an injunction.
So when will that? What's your anticipated next?
There's a court hearing on October 23rd for that
October
injunction,
23rd.
And presumably, that's cutting it kind of close because we do have an election coming up on November 5th,
yeah.
And but it's our hope that again the court will block the rule from going into effect. I should point out while we're on the topic that the secretary chose not to continue defending the voter removal rule, which is the one where anybody can come in and challenge a voter. So he's voluntarily relinquished that rule, so that's gone completely. Other than that, it's still looming in the shadows, and it could come back, and we're still trying to get it rejected by a court. But he has voluntarily stopped defending that at this point, and he's just going for the voter removal rule.
That's great news. We're here with Attorney Joe Glazebrook, and after the commercial break, we'll be joined by State Senator Tom Courtney. But thanks to Gateway Market for sponsoring this segment of the show. Gateway Market and Cafe, located at 20th and Woodland in the Sherman Hill District, provides lots of fresh groceries from Iowa farms and local producers and keeps their money in the local economy. Gateway Market creates memorable food experiences by offering an abundant selection of natural, organic, and specialty foods from around the world. They serve the central Iowa community by providing locally made, handcrafted products in a welcoming, customer-centered environment that encourages learning and honors the simple pleasures of the table. Stop in today for a delicious breakfast, lunch, or dinner, a favorite local spot. And thanks to Hawk Restaurant, experience healthy, local, delicious, sustainable, farm-to-table dining in the historic East Village of Des Moines, serving lunch, dinner, and brunch on Sundays, all while eating in season. Thanks to Fighting Burrito in Ames and in downtown Des Moines, a great green place to have lunch. Healthy, delicious, and quick. Stop in today. And again, thanks to Gateway Market for sponsoring this segment of the show. We'll be right back.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
Drug and alcohol addiction slowly steals a person's identity, tearing away pieces of their life little by little until one day it seems like the hope of a happy future is gone and there's no chance of getting it back. Here at St. Gregory Retreat Centers, we can assure you that there is hope. Our unique approach to recovery begins with the understanding that the dysfunction and damage caused by addiction can be overcome, not just dealt with. Don't let another day go by. Call St. Gregory today.
Well, good morning. This is the 7th of June in the Lord's year 2010, and this is day 1 of webcast1live.com. We will begin with Max World Live with my special guest, Tom Coates. In just a minute, there's Tom. Wait. Howdy. And we will be live for the very first time on Webcast One Live. Someday we're going to look back on this and say, gosh, remember that old day in history? Wonder where Walter Cronkite was. He must have been around hanging there too. But actually, it's the beginning of Webcast One Live. And thank you for listening. Thanks, Rob Spearman, and everybody who's put together this project together. And we're ready to go live now. So thanks for listening to MaxWorldLive.com.
I can't tell you that it's going real well from time to time, but it is going.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
we're back talking about voter ID on the Fallon Forum. My name is Matt Sinovic, the Executive Director of Progress Iowa. We're joined in studio by Joseph Glazebrook, the attorney representing the ACLU and LULAC in an ongoing lawsuit against the Secretary of State, Matt Schultz. In just a moment, we'll be joined by Joe Henry, the State Director of LULAC, and Bonnie Pitts, the President of the League of Women Voters of Iowa. We're attempting to get Senator Tom Courtney of Burlington on the line, and when we do, we will have him join in as well. Joseph, we were talking before the break about this case, and we showed a video of Secretary of State Schultz at the top of the hour, where he was caught on tape at a Republican political event, sort of laying out what many have feared are his real reasons for promoting voter ID and these emergency rules. And he basically said that if conservatives believe in preventing same-sex marriage or any of these social issues that they typically care about, that they should get behind voter ID because that's a policy and a plan that will help them win elections. You, if I understand right, you actually were able to enter those remarks into the case. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. So at our last hearing, which was, I want to say maybe June, or I can't remember the exact date, but we were in court again because the Attorney General filed a motion to dismiss the lawsuit because we were still attacking the emergency rules, which were no longer in effect. They had been replaced by the normal rules. Not to get too technical, but basically the issue came up about whether or not it was relevant, whether the secretary had voluntarily rescinded those rules, whether that took the issue off the table. And of course, we called that into question. And we said, we're not convinced by his statements that he's completely done targeting these voters. We don't, pardon us, but we don't trust you, Mr. Secretary. When you say you're going to stop this one rule, we think you might do it again. Because there's a history in this country, of course, in the civil rights era and otherwise, of elected officials saying that they're going to stop whatever bad practice they're doing and then turning around and starting up again once the courts get out of it.
You mean a politician would say one thing and do another?
I would never suggest anything so ruthless, but and I'm just kidding. Of course, that's what we think. So anyway, when that issue came up, and when we were challenging whether Secretary of Schultz was going to voluntarily stop this sort of attack on the right to vote for some Iowans, we couldn't help but point out that he has a strong personal motivation for these rules that is different from the stated reasons in their legal pleadings. In other words, he might have been not telling the whole truth when he says that this is all about voter integrity. It's really, his own words suggest that this might be about using a voting restriction to make it easier for conservatives or other people that agree with his issues to get elected and enact those issues. And that's relevant because when he walks into court and says this is about voter integrity, and then he turns around and says something else to a private group, you don't know quite what to believe.
And so that's really the issue at case is his political agenda for pushing these emergency rules, and then conducting a subsequent investigation of voter fraud in the state, which has turned up almost nothing. The legislature, and specifically Senator Tom Courtney, has requested an investigation by the state auditor to look into potential misuse of federal funds by the Secretary of State's office. Has that issue come up at all in your case?
That has not really been a prominent issue in the case. We certainly are concerned about that, and if it does turn out that he's misusing federal funds, that's yet another reason why we might need to hold him accountable in the courts. But no, we haven't really litigated that issue. I know that Senator Courtney did a public records request for some internal documents in the Secretary's office to determine how he was spending some of that money. We know that he spent $280,000 of taxpayer money on this DCI investigator to go out and investigate non-existent cases of voter fraud. And so there were some serious concerns. And what we found, what Senator Courtney found, I believe, is that there were a lot of discussions about how do we get this HAVA money, which stands for Help America Vote Act, and how do we use it. And I think that's going to come out more as the case goes along. But just keep in mind, the Help America Vote Act, it's got the word help vote right there in the name of the statute. And so it's just ridiculous to use money from that federal law to deprive Americans from voting.
And as a result of that investigation, and for those that don't know, the DCI stands for
the Department of Criminal Investigation,
and that's out of the attorney. That's out of the Attorney General's office.
It's actually
is that right?
It's its
or
own
joint
agency.
Oh, okay. So they're the
Department
ones,
of Public Safety, I guess, oversees it.
Yeah, the Department of Public Safety, and they've been investigating potential cases of voter fraud for how long has that been going on?
Well, these rules coincided with the Secretary announcing that he was hiring the DCI agent last year. So it would, about a year.
About a year and zero. We were talking about this in the break. Zero prosecutions or zero convictions have resulted from this investigation.
Right, and I haven't been keeping track of every single case, but I know that as of September 5th, there have been zero convictions since that investigation started, and that only a few people, just a handful of people in various counties had been even charged, and each of them seems to have had a reason that they voted when they shouldn't have, whether they, there's like 3 Canadians who didn't understand that you couldn't vote in off-year elections. They thought you could not vote for president, but you could vote in state elections, and just things like that. And the truth is, the other thing that you got to keep in mind is there's no evidence in this case or otherwise that these new rules would have done anything whatsoever to address the 13 people who are at this point just charged with a crime.
We're talking with Attorney Joseph Glazebrook, who represents the ACLU and LULAC, about voter ID and Secretary of State Matt Schultz's crusade to investigate nearly non-existent voter fraud, and also his political agenda pursuing these issues to enable conservatives to win elections. We're also joined in studio by Joe Henry, the state director of LULAC. Joe, thank you so much for joining us today.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Now, all of these issues that Joseph has been talking about with the pending lawsuit and the threat of convictions and these letters that could potentially be sent to folks that targeted by Secretary of State Matt Schultz, what effect do you think that will have, and what have your members been concerned about when talking about voter ID?
Well, we're very concerned about it. We feel that this is going to create a chilling effect as he moves forward with as a Secretary of State. And in some of the counties during the last election cycle, we were hearing from some of our members that the volunteers who hand out the ballots were asking for quite a bit of information to verify that our members were citizens. So there is an impact going on right now when it comes down to the county auditor level and the voting that's going on. And it is a chilling effect. And this purging, we feel that these are false negatives, that this is a ploy by the Secretary of State to go after specific groups, Latinos as one of the main groups.
So in addition to joining this lawsuit, which LULAC has done, and for those who don't know, what does LULAC stand for?
League of United Latin American Citizens.
Terrific.
We're the oldest Latino organization in the country.
Oh, wow, great.
Yeah.
So in addition to joining this lawsuit, what else has LULAC been doing, or what can be done to sort of fight back or push back against these efforts, these scare tactics?
Well, right now we're working with our attorney at the ACLU to provide additional information. So we're monitoring things out in the different areas of the state, specifically the eastern part of Iowa. And with this last round of elections, we were getting reports back on what had been happening. So providing support in that way, gathering information, informing our members what their rights are.
Terrific. I believe we have Senator Tom Courtney on the line. Senator Courtney, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, Matt.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us. We're here with Joseph Glazebrook and Joe Henry talking about voter ID and Secretary of State Matt Schultz's efforts to promote that change to Iowa law, which of course would require voters to present a government-issued ID in order to vote. To pursue his voter fraud investigation, crusade, whatever you want to call it, you actually made the request to the state auditor to investigate what Schultz has been spending or how he's been spending the federal dollars.
Matt, I was for a long time. I was chair of the Senate Oversight Committee. I'm no longer a chair now, but I was chair for a long time. While I was chair, this came up and began to present itself. So I was made aware that the Secretary of State was using HAVA money. Now, for those that don't know, HAVA money is the Help America Vote Act. It was a federal mandate put down from the Bush administration, actually, after the fiasco in Florida with the Bush-Gore election. The Bush administration and others pushed this HAVA through, and it was to help counties and localities upgrade their voting, in some cases buy new machines, lots of things. And there were a HAVA commission in each state, and it was lots of money. I don't know how much, gazillions of, to use a legislative term, gazillions of dollars was allocated for that. In Iowa, there was about, I don't know, we used a lot of it. There was about $300,000 still in there. Secretary of State decided he could arbitrarily use that money to start investigating so-called voter fraud in the state. I don't believe that that's what that money was for. I don't believe it was ever intended for that.
What was that money for?
That money was for Iowans to counties to buy new machines, new voting machines if they needed them. They got to clean up whatever they needed to clean up to help America vote. That's what it's all about. And we felt that's what the money was for. He decided it was to pay for a investigator out of the Attorney General's office, I believe. He decided it was money that he could use for that. That's what I asked the Secretary of State's office the auditor's office to investigate, was whether that money could be used for that. It took me a long time to get the feds to act on it. Finally turned out their office didn't have any money. The federal office that would have investigated. In the meantime, we changed auditors in Iowa, and the new auditor, as soon as she took over, I sent her a letter asking her to investigate. She took a look at it, and it's my understanding now, the last letter that I've gotten from her, they are looking into it, investigating just to see if Secretary of State can use that money for, in my view, what it was never intended for. There's a lot about this. I heard what one of your folks there said. I was a little late getting on when I got on. I heard him talking about intimidation. My district's I have one of the largest Latino populations in the state, between West Liberty and Columbus Junction, one of the largest populations. And as I went around door knocking this year, I talked to a lot of folks that I believe there is a lot of intimidation. I would go to households where maybe the two or three people were legal residents, but they might have one person there who's illegal. I'm not talking about that. That's a different situation. That's a whole different deal. But that one person being illegal would stop the rest of the household from voting because they said there's stuff going on we don't want to be involved in, and we're afraid that our friend or relative, whoever it is, will get deported. That's how it's intimidation. That stops in this case, the case that I was talking about, that it would stop three people from going to the polls and voting who had done absolutely nothing wrong. They were legitimate residents of the state. And that's what I think that this is all about. Secretary of State has continually said from the day he first started running that he was going to do something about the rampant voter fraud in Iowa. $300,000, and over 2 years later, they managed to come up with, I think, 8 folks, and none of them will ever be convicted of anything. They've just been mistakes or whatever. There is not rampant voter fraud in Iowa. And this guy is manufacturing it because it makes people mad, and I think he's just manufacturing the whole thing.
Well, what do you so it sounds like you expect that the state auditor will find out that the Secretary of State's office has, in fact, been misusing these federal dollars. Do you have an anticipated timeline, or have they given you any sense of when they will publish their results or make them known to the public?
No, they have not given me any time. I will say that the auditor's office has been very cooperative with me. I don't have a complaint with the auditor's office, but I don't have a timeline. They haven't given me a timeline either. So I don't know. And time is really critical. Now, one of the things that happened was the investigator that they had hired, that they had used from he worked for the AG's office, and they hired him away from there just on a temporary basis. My understanding, he or she got recalled back to Iraq or Afghanistan. It was a military person. They had to go back on active duty. So if that's the case, that's what slowed that issue down. And I don't know that the Secretary of State hired anyone else or not. So that kind of muddies the waters here. But I just need to know if the money that he took from HAVA was intended for that. And I don't believe it was. I don't think anybody with an ounce of sense would say that that's what that money was for. But the auditor's going to have to answer that.
Now, in May of this year, Senator Joni Ernst, who's now a candidate for U.S. Senate, she introduced an amendment that would have enacted voter ID in Iowa.
Yep.
Now, her amendment, of course, was defeated on a 26-24 party line vote.
Yep.
Why did you vote against it? We've been talking about voter ID policies in addition to this ongoing investigation.
Look, I have said, I have said all along that I'm not necessarily opposed to voter ID, but if we're going to have a voter picture ID at the polls, then the state of Iowa needs to make an ID available to every person in this state who wants one free of charge. So any bill that comes before me to get my vote, there's 25 other people in my party that get a vote on it too, plus the Republicans. But to get my vote, there's going to have to be money in that legislation, money to see that everyone gets an ID. Now, I've been told that will never work, that will never work. I don't know why it wouldn't work, but you can't expect people to show an ID at the polls without giving them the opportunity to have one. And you can't charge, because if you charge, in my view, that's a poll tax. So they have to be free of charge, and we have to make them available. That's what I think, and that's what I think we should be doing. So any bill that comes down is going to have the dollars there, and I am told it could be anywhere from $20 to $40 million. Well, okay, let's put the money there. And in order for me to vote for that bill, this governor has been running rampant on vetoing legislation in the past 2 years, and he's really good at letting you think you're gonna if you pass legislation, he'll be okay with it and sign it, and then he goes into it and line item vetoes the things he doesn't like. I believe if the money was included in that bill, that he'd have figured out a way to take that out of the bill before he signed it. That's what he's famous for, and that's what he does. So in order for me to vote for that bill, Matt, it's going to have to be ironclad in there, all the money it takes from the taxpayers of Iowa to make sure that everyone who wants an ID and is eligible for an ID gets one free of charge. That's all I said. And then I think I'm good with voter ID. But so far, all the bills that they've brought forward, all they said is every voter must have an ID at the polls. That's all they said. No money was ever involved to fix it.
So you wouldn't be opposed to it, just decrease the barriers or eliminate the barriers for those folks who don't have IDs already in getting those, so that they would then be able to vote without any of these scare tactics or any of these other issues that have come up.
Of course, I would not be opposed to that. That would be going to the way it's been in Iowa for a long time. And I've never been one that thinks there's any voter fraud going on anyway. The penalties in Iowa for voter fraud, if someone goes down the polls and votes for me, well, number one, when they go vote for me, they've already got a vote. So they're giving up their vote for somebody else. If they fraudulently come into my county or something and vote for me when they shouldn't, the fine is something like, I don't know, it's like $7,000 and 5 years in prison or something. if they get caught. Now, I'm sure my constituents love me, but I don't know how many of them would really be willing to spend that kind of time in prison and that kind of money just to cast one vote for me. I don't believe that it's an issue in Iowa. And folks will tell you, oh, well, you have to have an ID to get on an airplane. You have to have an ID to cash a check. That's right. But we're talking about voting here. We're talking about something that Americans have the right to do and are guaranteed the right to do, and Iowans are guaranteed the right to do. And I think it's different than flying. The only reason you have to show an ID flying is, well, the biggest thing is the terrorist thing that came out many, many years ago, and I agree with that. I think that's fine. But that's the difference that I see in voting. It would be different, Matt, if the investigation had turned up thousands and thousands of frauds, but they haven't. Now, the Secretary of State's office says that there's a potential for 20 or 30,000 fraudulent voters. But in reality, the real number that we've seen are 8 votes, and they're very, very dubious.
Well, Senator Courtney, thank you very much for your efforts to prevent the voter ID law from being enacted and to investigate the misuse of federal funds. And thanks for being on the show today.
Well, thanks for having me on the show, Matt. Anytime.
We'll be right back after this break with Bonnie Pitts, the president of the League of Women Voters of Iowa, and Joe Henry, the state director of LULAC. Thanks to the Immigrant Entrepreneurs Summit for sponsoring this segment of the show. The 2013 Immigrant Entrepreneurs Summit on November 9th at Drake University will be a great event to learn about starting and growing your businesses. At a cost of only $35, you'll learn about the Affordable Care Act, changes in tax code, and get help with your business plan and a lot more. Last year, more than 500 folks attended, and about 100 new business startups came out of the event. Sign up today. Thanks to Tally's Restaurant Bar and Catering, located in Beaverdale, offering unique menus and delicious food for breakfast, lunch, and early bird and dinner. Be sure to check out their patio and rooftop and enjoy the great outdoors. Thanks to Ritual Cafe, a great place for tea, coffee, smoothies, paninis, meetings, music, and more. There's always something happening at Ritual. And again, thanks to the Immigrant Entrepreneurs Summit for sponsoring this segment of the show.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
I'm Brian Leach, owner and general manager of Service Legends. I brought along a couple of the home comfort heroes.
Hi, I'm Tammy Wells.
I am Nick Wondershad.
I'm administrative manager.
I am the senior technician
from Service Legends.
It seems like every good thing, when you feel it to the bone that it's good, there's a lot of hard work put behind it. I don't think that you can fake it and have it turn out good.
You know, if we seem like, okay, that's just weird, it's just a furnace, why would you believe so deeply in a furnace? It's not just that, you know, we want to show the world that you can have good service.
Yeah, I mean, it's gotta be, it's your home.
You know, it's built into our daily trainings, it's built into our culture, that we're gonna do whatever it takes to have each client say they love us, period.
That's why we spend all the hours in the training that we do. And if we guarantee it's gonna be a good experience for you, or else it's free, what type of work do you think we're gonna do?
There is a guarantee.
Temperature selection guarantee, fixed right or it's free guarantee, comfort guarantee, best value guarantee. All of these guarantees hold us accountable to ensuring that we exceed your expectations. And if for whatever reason we'd fail and we can't make it right, we guarantee all of those guarantees with a 100% money back guarantee.
I mean, if you don't think that your technician can fix it right, are you gonna say that to a client? No.
You don't have to worry about having a technician come to your house.
We drug test, background check all of our team members. We put safe people in your home. Each and every one of our service techs, 400 hours a year in training.
You tell it the minute they walk in the door. They know what they're doing, they've done their homework, and they actually truly care about what you want.
Because at the end of the day, you're the person that makes sure I have a job.
They're gonna be listening. They're gonna wanna know what your challenges are. Then they're gonna come and give you options, and you get to choose.
If I'm there to help and I make it easy and painless, I did my job right that day.
Well, when it comes to your comfort, safety, and your family, you know, you don't necessarily go buy the most expensive, but you get the most bang for your buck.
Oh, it's worth it, because there's a lot of people that will find a way to get it to work right now and then leave and then come back, charge you again, and the cycle just repeats itself. So when I'm out there looking at the furnace, I want to find why it failed today. How can we change the part today with something that you're not going to have to worry about? Is it worth changing the part today? I mean, you can put a lot of money into a furnace. I can fix parts all day. There's good job security in that for me, but is it the right thing for you?
I get a lot of the phone calls of after the technicians are there. They're just in awe. They're like, wow, you guys are great. I mean, I don't even know what to say. You guys are great. Everything you did was perfect. It was great.
Keep going though. I like this.
Just give us a try. I'm going to take all the risk.
I've got the time to make this right. I've got the support to make it right.
Just check us out.
And if you don't see the value in what we do,
I mean, fixed right or it's free or 100% money back.
enough said.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
We're back. Thank you for joining us on the Fallon Forum. My name is Matt Sinovic, the Executive Director of Progress Iowa, sitting in for Ed Fallon, who is traveling overseas, actually. And thanks to Fighting Burrito for sponsoring this segment of the show. Located in Ames and downtown Des Moines on 13th Street, just south of Locust, you'll find a great atmosphere, great staff, and a delicious lunch. Their belief is a good meal can prepare you to do great things, and a healthy meal is a great step toward a satisfied, focused mind. Fighting Burrito is proud to serve fresh ingredients from local vendors, and they care about this planet and work hard to be efficient and green. Join the fight today. Thanks to Dan Kelly in Newton, a versatile guy who is a legislator, real estate agent, and DJ. Who knew? And thanks to Story County vet Dr. Kim Holding, who's been treating critters of all kinds of names for more than 3 decades. Your pets will come home smiling. And again, thanks to Fighting Burrito for sponsoring this segment of the show. Now, we're joined here in studio by Joe Henry, the state director of LULAC, and Bonnie Pitts, the president of League of Women Voters of Iowa. Before we get to them, we've been talking about voter ID, or the policy, the requirement that folks would have to show a government-issued ID at the polls in order to vote. Now, this policy has been enacted in 30 states around the country. Thankfully, Iowa is not one of them, or else one of these stories would have Iowan in front of their name instead of some of these other states. In Tennessee, Dorothy Cooper, a 96-year-old woman who has voted in almost every election since she was old enough to vote, couldn't meet a new voter ID requirement because she didn't have a copy of her marriage license. In Ohio, Paul Carroll, an 86-year-old World War II veteran, was told his voter ID from the VA wasn't good enough for the recent Ohio primary election because it did not include his address. In Texas, Jose Zuniga, an 83-year-old man who uses a wheelchair, would have to take 2 or 3 buses and travel 20 miles to reach the nearest state government office where he can get the new photo ID he would need to vote. These stories are rampant across the country in the 30 states that have required voter identification, as Secretary of Matt Schultz has pursued. Now, the Secretary of State would tell you that voter ID is necessary to ensure the quality and the fairness of our elections. But in a video that we showed you earlier in the hour, which is available at progressiowa.org, along with documentation for this entire show, he was caught on tape at a private Republican Party event where he said that in order to win elections, conservatives need to support voter ID. So when he's taken that political tactic, every other piece of his agenda comes into question. Now, we're joined here by Joe Henry, the state director of LULAC, whose organization has joined in a lawsuit to help prevent some of the tactics that the Secretary of State is trying to put forward. Joe, thanks again for being here.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Now, what exactly we heard Senator Tom Courtney earlier talking about some of the mindset that people have when they hear about these issues and some of the fear that they might feel. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us any stories about folks from around the state that you've spoken with or members of your organization?
Mm-hmm. Well, when people who are immigrants become citizens here in Iowa, I mean, thousands of people become new citizens. You know, they're coming from countries where there might have been oppressive governments. So they come here, they become citizens, they get sworn in, and they're urged to vote. And that's what they do. They go out there and they vote. But when they hear about that there might be some sort of proof or requirement put forth by the government for them to have to prove that they're citizens, this creates a chilling effect. They don't understand it. You know, they want to vote. People do vote. When this whole issue came out last year about Secretary of State Schultz wanting to do this worked its way down to the county auditors. And then this was communicated to people within our community. And fear has been created because of this, because people are being led to believe that they're going to have to prove their citizenship after they've already become citizens. So it has been a concern to our folks in LULAC, to the folks across the state.
It's funny you use the phrase chilling effect, and I believe that's exactly right, or right on. But that is, if you look at, it's on page 10 of the district court's temporary injunction last fall, when the court ruled that Secretary of State Schultz could not enact the emergency rules that he was trying to put into place. They actually said that it could easily be seen as having a chilling effect on Iowa residents who are actually qualified electors, people who are registered to vote and have the right to vote, but then they have this chilling effect by what the Secretary of State's doing.
Yeah. Can you imagine if somebody came to your door and said, "We're not sure if you're a citizen. Prove it." I mean, that would be unbelievable. So for a new citizen to be told by a DCI agent that they have to provide proof, that scares the heck out of them. And they're going to communicate that. They're going to worry about things. So again, we're very concerned about this. These things have happened. We want this to stop. We believe that this is for political purposes, that he knows these things are false negatives. And it needs to stop. The system has been working. It's been working over and over again on verifying the rights of people to vote. So nothing new needs to be put in place.
Bonnie Pitts is with us. She's the president of the League of Women Voters of Iowa. Bonnie, thanks so much for joining us.
I'm delighted to be here.
Now, you've written about voter ID and some of these policies in publications across the state, having, I believe, some op-eds published.
Yes.
Could you tell me a little bit about your work and the work of the League of Women Voters on this issue?
Well, the League attended 4 hearings on this issue with Secretary of State rulings, and we became aware that it was a very serious problem, and we're also considered. We know that the voter ID business is something that people need to be informed about. So we've worked really hard to inform our members and the public about what the ramifications of adopting voter ID would be for the citizens of Iowa. We see that it's going to affect the elderly, students who don't have a driver's license, minority populations, people who don't have a driver's license. And in my own case, my mother was in a nursing home. She voted all through her adult years, and she was a very bright woman. But the last few years of her life, she had Parkinson's, and so she would not have a driver's license. And if this voter ID was in effect in Iowa, then she would have had to get the government-issued ID and just go through all the work that would involve. So, I can see that it would affect a great many families. And so with the League, we're just working on education more than anything else.
So if voter ID had been enacted, then your mother may not have been able to vote, or would have faced really high barriers to that she would have had to surpass in order to get to the polls.
That's right. When people get along in years, my father is 94 and he's doing quite well, and but they get confused easily. And whenever you ask them to do a lot of paperwork or sign things or try to understand something that's different than what they've experienced before, it can be a real challenge. So, I see for the elderly population to be told, okay, you're not driving, you don't have a driver's license, but you do need a government ID to vote. That would be very, very difficult for them.
Now, as Senator Courtney mentioned, the folks he saw at the door and this chilling effect that is happening already just because the Secretary of State has been pursuing this, the news has been covering it. It's a big national issue as well. So people might even be confused about the fact that Iowa doesn't have this. What can the League do, or what can we do to educate folks about it?
That's one of the things that we see happening. On January 3rd, at one of the hearings, we had some of the people that were there are poll workers, and they worked at the polls for years and years, and they know the process. They know how to go about it. They said, now people come in and they're really confused because often they say, "Oh, can we see your driver's license?" And they they're uncertain about what needs to be done. So people, the voters, have questions. They're a little confused because voter ID is all over the newspapers, and it's affecting states all over the country.
So they ask for their driver's license, even though they may not need to? Or is that, Joe, Joe, have you seen this as well?
This is what we're hearing. See, what we're dealing with is everybody who votes knows that when you go into your polling place, you have volunteers. And these volunteers are usually older because they have the time to be there as poll workers. And they're confused because they're hearing things from the media and not enough information is coming down from the county auditors. So in turn, what's happening is when people come in there, especially people who are of color, who may have kind of broken English, they might think that they have the right to ask those people to show an ID, a driver's license, a picture ID. So we're running into this right now, lack of education, nothing is being done. So we're not seeing enforcement from the Secretary of State's office to the county auditors to educate the poll workers on what they should and should not be doing. So in turn, this is happening due to lack of education along with lots of propaganda.
To me, that's absolutely terrifying because you have uneducated, or not uneducated, but uninformed people working the polls.
Yeah.
And the person who is supposed to be giving them information about what they can and can't ask for is Secretary of State Matt Schultz, who's the one pursuing these policies in the first place.
Very political. If you just look at the way it's being done now, he is putting his energy on enforcement, and he's not putting any effort into education, in educating the people who are the most important, the people on the ground at the polls. So come November 2nd, come November 5th, you can almost pretty much bet that the poll workers, again, will not be educated. There should be some enforcement to remind them. There should be something that the county auditors do on paper to remind those workers that they cannot be doing these things that will in turn be a form of intimidation and harassment and an ongoing chilling effect.
Is this maybe somewhere where we could work together, or where groups could work together to get information out to poll workers, or is that strictly the domain of the Secretary of State and the county officials?
Scary. It's truly rests with the county. The counties choose where the polls are at and how the workers are informed. We do not, as regular citizens, have access to that. And, it would be very beneficial if we had a legal way to require him, Secretary of State Schultz, to educate the auditors who are then required to educate the poll workers. The poll workers need to know, again, most of them are senior citizens, and they need to be informed that they cannot be doing certain things which are illegal.
Well, Joe Henry with LULAC, Bonnie Pitts with the League of Women Voters of Iowa, and Attorney Joseph Glazebrook, thank you all for joining us today for our discussion about voter identification, voter fraud, and Secretary of State Matt Schultz's political crusade to make this happen. I really appreciate you all being here today.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Thank you.
Tomorrow we'll be back. That's our show for today. As I mentioned earlier, all of the documentation and resource material for today's show is available at progressiowa.org. There's a link on the front page that says all about voter ID, and you'll find resources with the video that we showed at the beginning of the program and a lot more terrific information. On tomorrow's show, we'll feature State Representative Tyler Olson, candidate for governor, and then we'll have a roundtable discussion with a couple of top political reporters, Mike Weiser, the Lee State House Bureau Chief, and James Lynch of the Cedar Rapids Gazette. Thanks so much, and we will see you tomorrow. And thanks to Hawk Restaurant for sponsoring this last segment of the show. If you've not yet visited Hawk, be sure to make plans to do so. Experience delicious, sustainable, farm-to-table dining in the historic East Village of Des Moines at East 5th and Walnut. The menu evolves almost daily and exists to showcase the finest of Iowa ingredients while supporting local farmers. Owners Suman and Cynthia Hawk believe the best meals begin with the best ingredients. That's why approximately 90% of their ingredients come from local farms. They are passionate about creating healthy, seasonal dishes with flavors from around the world. They're committed to what they do and think you'll taste the difference. Thanks to Diana's Wedding Cakes in Newton, and not just for weddings. She also has cupcakes and cookies, all kinds of goodies. So call her for your special events needs. Thanks to Community CPA and Associates Incorporated, who are committed to providing professional accounting and tax services to their clients where the differences in cultures, social values, and business practices are well understood without prejudice and preconceived judgment. Thanks again to Hawk Restaurants for sponsoring this last segment of the show. And thanks to Maddie Kane, who is our producer, and to Webcast One Live. Thanks again, lastly, to our show sponsors, the Iowa chapter of the Sierra Club, Iowa Physicians for Social Responsibility, the Great March for Climate Action, and to all our sponsors who help make this show possible. And thanks to you all for listening, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.